In this video, we will talk about one of the earliest and greatest defeats that the Roman army faced, which was against the Kingdom of Kush in Nubia. This defeat was largely due to the pride and paranoia that weakened the defenses of the Roman frontier in Egypt, allowing the queen of the Kingdom of Kush to fight against the Roman army and humiliate Emperor Augustus himself. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. The clash against the Kingdom of Kush takes place just 2 decades before the Roman legions perish in the forests of Germania. In fact, few events were more significant to the Roman Empire than the defeat in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, which occurred during the autumn of 9 AD, disrupting Emperor Augustus's expansion plans. But the battle against the Kushites would also be frustrating for the emperor. In 30 BC, after his triumph in the Battle of Actium, Octavian arrived in Egypt at the head of his army. At that time, Cleopatra had already committed suicide, thus ending the Ptolemaic dynasty and leaving the throne vacant. However, Octavian refused the royal crown. Instead, he made Egypt a Roman province. 3 years later, Octavian received the name Augustus, and Egypt, along with its vast wealth, became the private property of the emperor. To protect his crown jewel, Augustus ordered that 3 legions be stationed in Egyptian territory: the 3rd Cyrenaica Legion, the 22nd Deiotariana Legion, and a legion whose name has been lost to history. In total, in 30 BC, Rome had approximately 15,000 soldiers in the province, with the main tasks of these soldiers being to maintain internal peace and patrol the southern border. Most of the soldiers were stationed in Thebes, the ancient capital, and near Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. In the event of an enemy attack, these troops would march south and provide assistance to the border garrisons. However, all these actions were not enough for Augustus, who wanted to avoid a civil war at all costs. With this goal in mind, the emperor monopolized control of the army, ensuring that all legions answered directly to their commander-in-chief, in this case himself. However, due to the immense importance of Egypt to the empire's economy and its strategic role, Augustus appointed his close supporter, Gaius Cornelius Gallus, as the first governor of Roman Egypt. Unlike other provincial governors, he also took personal command of the 3 legions stationed there. However, shortly after Gallus's arrival, a revolt broke out in the south around Syene. We must not forget that Egypt had just undergone a regime change, and not every Egyptian was happy with their new masters. But Gallus was more than successful. After suppressing the revolt, he moved further south, crossing the First Cataract and capturing the fortress island of Philae in the lower part of northern Nubia. His victories were so great that to commemorate his achievements, Gallus erected a monument in Philae. However, he didn't stop there. According to the historian Cassius Dio, the proud governor continued to build monuments in his honor throughout Egypt, inscribing the list of his accomplishments even at the top of pyramids. Not surprisingly, this didn't sit well with the emperor, who saw Gaius as a potential threat. And to make matters worse, it didn't help that Gallus was a learned man and a poet, with a great reputation among the elites of Rome. The result was a tragedy for the first Roman governor of Egypt. Stripped of all his wealth and fearing for his life, Gallus committed suicide. And following this event, in an attempt to avoid risks to his personal glory, Augustus filled the vacant position with a more flexible and less ambitious man named Aelius Gallus. However, unlike his predecessor, Aelius's first military foray, the expedition to Arabia Felix in 25 BC, was a complete failure. To make matters worse, many of the soldiers stationed in Egypt were transferred to the expeditionary force, leaving the southern border exposed to hostile attack. Nevertheless, the Romans' desire for conquest did not diminish. Like previous rulers of Egypt, they fantasized about Nubian gold and other riches of Africa, motivations that were extremely tempting and seemed within their reach after the capture of Philae. However, the Romans miscalculated. Before embarking on his expedition to Arabia, Aelius Gallus imposed a tax on areas traditionally considered part of the Kingdom of Kush. According to Strabo, this act enraged the Kushite leader, Queen Amanirenas. Strabo refers to her as Candace. The exact translation of this name is uncertain, with possibilities such as Mother Queen or Regent. However, even though we are unsure of the meaning of her name, one thing is certain: Amanirenas was a formidable leader and a powerful warrior queen. In this context, in the year 24 BC, taking advantage of the absence of legions, the queen led her army northward to the First Cataract. The Kushite army quickly invaded the Roman garrison in Philae and entered imperial territory, advancing to Syene and Elephantine. Then, they retreated south with plunder, Roman prisoners, and thousands of Egyptian captives. As a final insult, the Kushites desecrated the statue of Augustus, decapitating it and taking his head as war booty. Interestingly, in 1910, the bronze head of the emperor was discovered buried beneath the steps of the Temple of Amun in Meroe, the capital of the Kingdom of Kush. The location was carefully chosen to ensure that anyone entering the building would step on the image of emperor. However, despite the Kingdom of Kush's formidable victory, the war had only just begun. Such humiliation could not be tolerated, and Rome had to respond. The new governor, Petronius, gathered a large army of over 10,000 men and marched south, entering Nubia. The two armies met near Selkis, a region 100 kilometers south of the First Cataract. However, despite their formidable numbers, victory seemed like a distant dream for the Romans, as the troops of the Kingdom of Kush had a significant numerical advantage of 3 men for every Roman. To be more precise, the Romans had around 10,000 infantry and 800 cavalry. Meanwhile, their enemies had an astonishing army of over 30,000 men. But it was in this moment of despair that the discipline and preparation of the Roman legions proved decisive once again. Eager for blood, Petronius pressed further south, towards the desert. However, their progress was hindered by the vast sand dunes as the army marched along the banks of the Nile. Between the First and Second Cataracts, the Romans captured the city of Premnis. Using a brilliant strategy, they took control of the navigable part of the Nile River, which greatly complicated the actions of the troops from the Kingdom of Kush. Furthermore, they had another significant advantage in their superior weaponry, which was of much higher quality and efficiency compared to the shields and swords of Kush. Finally, the Roman army reached Napata, the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Kush. Rejecting Amanirenas' peace offer, the Romans laid waste to the city, enslaving hundreds of inhabitants. However, the unfamiliar terrain, intense heat, and risk of disease prevented Petronius from advancing further into that hostile territory. Instead, he decided to retreat, considering the destruction of the enemy's capital a suitable punishment for those who dared to challenge Roman power. On their way back, Petronius left a small Roman garrison in Premnis, extending the Roman border into Lower Nubia. After returning to Alexandria, Petronius sent war trophies and thousands of enemy prisoners to Rome. The empire restored its honor, and it seemed to be the end of hostilities. But Petronius was mistaken. The success of the Roman expedition frightened the local tribes, who allied themselves with the vengeful queen, bolstering her army. Amanirenas reignited the conflict, leading her soldiers northward. She besieged the Roman garrison in Premnis but failed to capture the fortress. Determined to defeat the Kushites once and for all, Petronius marched south once again. The details are obscure, but in 21 BC, we know that both armies were exhausted. When Amanirenas offered peace, Petronius accepted. Aware perhaps of Gallus's fate, the governor advised the envoys to present their case directly to the emperor. At that time, Augustus was on the Greek island of Samos, busy negotiating with the Parthian Empire. Concerned about Parthia's actions, Rome's powerful eastern rival, Augustus made an unpleasant yet necessary decision. As a gesture of goodwill, the emperor acceded to Amanirenas' demands, including the withdrawal of all Roman armed forces from the disputed territories in Nubia. Furthermore, on his own initiative, Augustus revoked the tributes that had been imposed on the Kushites. To this day, scholars debate the motivations behind Augustus's actions, but it is presumed that the most likely reason is that the emperor believed the distant African kingdom of Kush was a minor nuisance compared to neighboring Parthia, which not long ago had annihilated an entire Roman army led by Crassus. Additionally, the peace stabilized the southern border, allowing Augustus to transfer the legions elsewhere, while the Kushites regained their status as a regional power. Both sides also benefited from trade. The Romans collected lucrative customs duties, and the Kingdom of Kush secured a stable source of revenue. However, alliances aside, the fact remains that warrior queen Amanirenas and the fierce resistance of her people humiliated the Roman army and disrupted Roman expansion. If you enjoyed seeing this great battle between the Romans and the Kush kingdom, leave your like on the video and subscribe to our channel.